The laughter reached me before the music did. It slipped through the swinging kitchen door in broken pieces. Sharp bursts of joy, clinking glasses, applause that rose and fell like waves. I was sitting on a metal folding chair. The cheap kind. The kind that wobbles when you breathe too hard. Every time I shifted my weight, it made a small, humiliating squeak. The kitchen was large but lifeless. Stainless steel counters. Half-empty trays. A catering cart with one broken wheel that clicked endlessly as someone passed by. The smell of food that had already been eaten by people who didn't know I existed. My name is Margaret Hale. And tonight my son was getting married. 3 hours earlier I had stood in front of my mirror, watching a stylist carefully curl my hair. 3 hours. I wore a soft mauve chiffon dress. Elegant, understated, expensive. The kind of dress you choose when you don't want attention, but still want to belong. Around my neck hung a thin gold necklace. My husband gave it to me 22 years ago. Before everything broke. I looked like I belonged at a wedding. Just not this one. The swinging door moved again. For half a second light spilled into the kitchen. Warm. Golden. Alive. I saw chandeliers. Round tables draped in white. People standing, laughing, clapping. Then the door swung shut. Silence rushed back in. From the other side I heard cheering. Loud. Excited. The first dance. I didn't need to see it to know. I could picture Ethan, my son, smiling that practice smile. The one he used when cameras were pointed at him. The one he used when he wanted to look grateful without actually feeling it. I imagined his hand resting on Claire Bennett's waist. His bride. Perfect hair. Perfect posture. Perfect family. A family that was not me. A man cleared his throat beside me. I looked up to see the catering manager. Mid-40s, tight smile, eyes that refused to meet mine. He leaned down slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. I just wanted to let you know, he said. The bride requested that you remain back here, for the duration of the reception. I blinked. Back here? Yes. She felt it would maintain the aesthetic of the event. The word landed hard. Aesthetic. I paid for this wedding. Every chair. Every flower arrangement. Every candle, every upgrade, every small extra, that somehow doubled the budget. But now I was a problem. Something that didn't match the picture. I see, I said quietly. He nodded, relieved I wasn't making a scene. Then he walked away. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening to my own breathing. From behind the door I watched the celebration through narrow gaps. Ethan laughing with Claire's parents, Linda and Howard Bennett. Radiant, confident, soaking up gratitude like sunlight. Linda hugged guests as if she were hosting the entire event. Howard clapped Ethan on the back, proud, loud, visible. And Ethan? He never once looked toward the kitchen. Not once. A plate of food was eventually placed beside me. Cold by the time I noticed it. Chicken I couldn't taste. Vegetables untouched. My feet ached. The kind of ache that comes from standing too long trying to be helpful. For years. I picked up the printed wedding program from a nearby counter. Page after page of names. Friends. Relatives. People who made this day possible. My name was nowhere. That was when something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. Pushpin mid-chapter message to the audience. If you're still with me right now, thank you for listening. Stories like this are uncomfortable, but they're real. If you want to hear what happens next, make sure you're subscribed and tap like. That helps these stories reach the people who need them most. The speeches began. I heard applause. Then Ethan's voice, amplified and confident. He thanked Claire. He thanked her parents. He thanked friends, mentors, people I barely recognized. He never said my name. Not once. That was the moment I took out my phone. Not shaking. Not crying. Calm. I opened my contacts. The florist answered on the second ring. Yes, this is Margaret Hale. I need to cancel tomorrow's delivery. The band coordinator sounded confused. Yes, the after party. Cancel it. The bar manager hesitated. Yes. Effective immediately. 3 calls. 3 decisions. Each one felt like reclaiming something that had been quietly taken from me for years. Behind the door the music swelled. People danced. They had no idea the celebration was already unraveling. I stood up, ignoring the chair's final squeak. No one stopped me as I walked out of the kitchen. No one noticed. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. Quiet. Honest. For the first time that evening I could breathe. I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal went. I didn't know what truths were waiting for me at home. I didn't know how much of my life had been built on silence and sacrifice. But I knew this. I was done being invisible. And this was only the beginning. The house was too quiet when I got home. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that presses against your ears and forces you to listen to your own thoughts. I kicked off my shoes by the door and stood there for a long moment, still wearing the dress, still holding my clutch like it contained something fragile. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching farther apart than the last. 11:47 p.m. The wedding was still going. Somewhere across town Ethan was dancing, laughing, drinking champagne I paid for. And I was here, alone. I walked into the kitchen and set my phone on the counter. The screen lit up immediately. No messages yet. That surprised me. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly, staring at the reflection of the ceiling light rippling in the glass. My hands were steady. That scared me more than shaking would have. I had imagined this moment before, leaving his wedding early. In my imagination I was crying, breaking, falling apart. Dad, I felt empty. I sat at the kitchen table and finally opened the spreadsheet. The wedding budget. I had worked on it for nearly a year. Every detail, every payment, every just one more thing, that somehow added another zero. Flowers upgraded at Claire's request. Linen imported from Italy. A string quartet replaced with a full band. All paid. All approved. All by me. Or so I thought. I clicked on my credit card statement. The first charge stood out immediately. Lux Spa, $2,400. I frowned. I hadn't booked a spa. Then another. Rooftop bar event. $3,100. My chest tightened. Full. Bridal weekend package. $1,850. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. These weren't accidents. These weren't mistakes. They were deliberate. I pulled up my email. Nothing. No receipts sent to me. No approvals requested. Then I opened Venmo. And there was a note attached to one of the payments. Public, careless, cruel. Ethan's mom is covering everything anyway. Might as well go big. Wedding vibes, 2 hearts. I stared at the screen. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me went numb, like a nerve finally giving up after too much pressure. So that was it. Not gratitude. Not love. Convenience. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Memories surfaced uninvited. Ethan at 6 years old, clutching my hand on his first day of school. Ethan at 16, slamming doors, telling me I didn't understand anything. Ethan at 25, asking, assuming I would help just a little with the wedding. A little had turned into everything. My phone buzzed. A message from Linda Bennett. Such a beautiful night. Thank you again for everything. Truly unforgettable. I didn't respond. Another buzz. A missed call. Then another. The silence had ended. I went to bed without changing. Lay there staring into the dark, fully dressed, shoes by the door, makeup still perfect. Sleep never came. At 3:12 a.m. I got up and walked to the hallway closet. I hadn't opened the bottom drawer in years. I knelt down and pulled it open. Inside was a red folder. Faded. Bent at the corners. Heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. I knew what it was before I touched it. I sat on the floor and opened it slowly. Letters. My husband's handwriting. The first one was dated 28 years ago. I read it once. Then again. And then I understood why my chest didn't hurt anymore. Why the wedding hadn't broken me the way it should have. Because something deeper had already cracked long ago. By morning my phone was relentless. Ethan. Claire. Aunt Ruth. My sister. Voicemails stacked on top of each other. Confusion turned into anger quickly. Why would you do this? This is childish. You embarrassed us. I deleted them all. I made coffee. Sat at the table. Opened my laptop again. This time I wasn't reviewing. I was ending things. One by one I sent emails. Polite. Short. Final. No explanations. No apologies. By 9 a.m. it was done. The wedding was over. Not because the music stopped, but because I did. I closed the laptop and looked around my kitchen. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like someone's background. I felt like someone who had reached the edge of a story, and decided not to fall. Outside, the morning light crept in through the window. Soft, unassuming. I picked up the red folder again. There were 2 letters left unread. And I knew, whatever was written in them would change everything. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, catching dust motes in a golden haze. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the red folder open before me, my fingers trembling, not with fear but with anticipation. The first letter was from my late husband, Jonathan Hale. The paper smelled faintly of aged ink, comforting and terrible all at once. My eyes traced the familiar slant of his handwriting, the letters curling just as they had 20 years ago. Margaret, if you are reading this, I am no longer there to explain, but the truth is something you need to know. Ethan is not my son biologically. I loved him as if he were. You have raised him with a heart stronger than most mothers possess. Know that my love for you and your courage in raising him was never a lie. I froze. My mind went blank. Not because of disbelief, but because everything I had built my identity on, the countless sleepless nights, the holidays spent alone planning his happiness, the sacrifices, I had done it for someone who was never truly mine in the way I had imagined. The betrayal wasn't Ethan's. It was the entire narrative I had been living. I picked up the second letter. Dated just days before Jonathan's death. The paper was crisper, as if he had written it knowing I might one day need it to survive. I know there may be anger, Margaret. There may be questions about what is right or fair. Ethan was never meant to be mine, nor will he ever be yours by blood. But he is yours by choice, and he always has been. Never let anyone diminish the incredible mother you have been. The words settled over me like a weight lifted instead of a burden added. I realized I had been living decades in a story not fully my own, yet I had made it real. My love had been my choice. My sacrifices my power. For the first time tears came, not from betrayal but from release. I stood and walked to the living room, the letters clutched in my hand. Every object around me seemed to speak. The faded photos of Ethan as a child. The dented furniture I had never bothered to fix. Every little memory was a testament to my life as it had been. And yet they no longer anchored me. They no longer defined me. I made a decision. Ethan's wedding had been a wake-up call. His exclusion, Claire's carelessness, the unacknowledged payments, all of it had stripped away the illusion that my love alone guaranteed my place in his world. I would not be invisible anymore. Not here. Not anywhere. I started making plans. Small ones at first. A spa day for myself on my own card this time. A new wardrobe that I chose for comfort and joy. A table set for one with fresh flowers and the kind of light that made a meal feel like a celebration. And then larger plans began to form. I would reclaim the house. The memories wouldn't be erased, but they would be framed differently. I would choose which parts of my life to honor and which to box away. Photos of Ethan went gently into a wooden crate, labeled memories, not obligations. I cleaned the space around me as carefully as if I were exorcising the weight of decades. Each sweep of the rag, each polished surface, each corner cleared felt like reclaiming territory of my soul that had been taken for granted. By noon I had a plan for the week ahead. I would reconnect with friends I had neglected. People who had seen me, not the mother of Ethan, not the provider, but me. I would create a circle of support around myself. A chosen family that valued presence over obligation. And yet something still lingered. A quiet anticipation like the calm before a storm. Because even with clarity, even with these letters, I knew one confrontation loomed. Then, I didn't want vengeance. I didn't want lectures. I wanted recognition. I wanted boundaries. And I would have both. I sat back on the couch, feeling for the first time in years the swell of my own power. Not the loud power of anger or revenge, but the quiet, unshakable authority that comes from understanding the truth. My phone buzzed again. This time a message from my cousin Diane. Margaret, I'm sorry. I saw what happened at the wedding. I didn't know how to intervene. You didn't deserve that. I smiled faintly. This small acknowledgement, though belated, was a thread I could hold on to. It reminded me that some people saw me, not my role, not my sacrifices, not my invisibility, but me. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in decades, I imagined a life not dictated by the needs and appearances of others, but by my own choices. I imagined a dinner where laughter came freely, where I was present, seen, and celebrated for the person I had always been beneath the expectations of motherhood and family drama. The thought made my chest expand like a balloon inflated with hope. And then I smiled, real, untethered. Because chapter 3 was not about Ethan. It wasn't even about the wedding. It was about me reclaiming my narrative. The letters, the budget spreadsheets, the excluded chairs, the cold meals, they were all markers of a story that was ending. And now I would write the next chapters myself. The house felt different once the sun began to lower, as if the walls themselves were adjusting to the version of me that now occupied them. Silence no longer felt empty, it felt earned. I poured myself a glass of water, stood at the kitchen counter, and realized something unsettling and beautiful at the same time. No one needed anything from me tonight. For decades, evenings had been structured around other people's hunger, schedules, crises. Ethan's homework, Jonathan's exhaustion. The unspoken expectation that I would be available, flexible, endlessly accommodating. Now there was nothing pulling at me. No obligation humming beneath my skin. Just space. I walked through the hallway slowly, barefoot, touching the walls as if I were greeting an old friend after a long absence. Every room carried echoes of a woman I had been. Efficient, dependable, invisible. I didn't hate her. I honored her. But I no longer belonged to her life. I stopped in front of the mirror near the stairs. For the first time since the wedding, I really looked at myself. Not as a mother. Not as a widow. Not as the woman who paid for everything and sat nowhere. Just Margaret. There were lines around my eyes I didn't remember earning, and a steadiness in my gaze I hadn't noticed before. That steadiness startled me more than the wrinkles ever could. It was the look of someone who had finally stopped negotiating her worth. That night I slept without dreams. No replays of the wedding. No imagined conversations with Ethan. No arguments rehearsed in my head. Just deep, uninterrupted rest. When I woke, I understood why. My body finally believed me when I said things were changing. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the table with a notebook. Not a budget spreadsheet. Not a to-do list for someone else's life. Just a blank page. At the top, I wrote one sentence. What do I want now? The question felt rebellious. Before I could overthink it, I wrote answers in quick, imperfect lines. I want mornings without guilt. I want laughter that doesn't cost me my dignity. I want relationships that don't require me to disappear to survive. I want to be invited or not at all. Halfway down the page, I stopped writing. And that's when I want to pause here for a moment. If you're still with me, if you've walked through this story, through the wedding, the letters, the quiet reckoning, thank you. Truly. Stories like this exist because someone on the other side is willing to listen. If this chapter resonates with you, please subscribe and stay with us. These next chapters go deeper. Into confrontation, into choice, into what happens when a woman finally stops shrinking herself to keep the peace. Stay with me in the next videos. And if you feel connected to this story, leave a comment. Just one word is enough. It tells me you're here. Now back to that notebook. I tore out the page and folded it carefully, placing it inside the red folder alongside Jonathan's letters. Not because I needed permission from the past, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The first time I asked myself what I wanted and didn't apologize for it. By midday my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Claire. It was an unfamiliar number. Margaret Hale, a woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Karen from Silverline Events. We wanted to confirm the cancellations. There's been some confusion. I smiled. Confusion was inevitable when the person who always said yes finally said no. Yes, I replied calmly. Everything stands. There was a pause. Then quieter. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. You weren't meant to, I said. And I meant it. After the call, I sat back and laughed. A soft, surprised sound. Not because of victory, but because I had stopped explaining myself. That alone felt like freedom. In the afternoon, I received another message. This time from Ethan. Mom, can we talk? I read it once. Then again. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because boundaries are not walls, they're doors. And I was deciding when and if to open this one. As evening approached, I cooked for myself. Real food. Fresh vegetables. A meal that took time and attention. I set the table with intention, placed a single candle in the center, and sat down without distraction. I realized something then that made my chest tighten. This was the first dinner in years where I wasn't anticipating criticism, silence, or being taken for granted. I ate slowly. I tasted everything. Later I texted Diane back. "Thank you for seeing me." Her reply came quickly. "You were never invisible. We just didn't know how to say it." I turned off my phone after that. Because chapter 4 wasn't about confrontation yet. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Ethan. It was about learning how to exist without bracing myself. And that, I understood, was the most radical change of all. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon, soft but deliberate. I was in the living room, sorting through a box of old mail I'd ignored for years. Warranties long expired, invitations I never attended, thank you cards written in someone else's handwriting. The sound of the knock didn't startle me. That surprised me most of all. I knew who it was before I stood up. Then, I didn't rush to the door. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I walked slowly, feeling each step, grounding myself in the present. When I opened the door, he stood there holding himself like a boy pretending to be a man. Shoulders stiff, eyes uncertain, hands empty. "Mom," he said. I noticed how strange it felt to hear that word now. Not painful. Just different. "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. He hesitated as if unsure he was still allowed. That hesitation told me more than any apology could have. The house was quieter than he remembered. No framed photos of his milestones on the walls. No trophies. No reminders of who he had been here. His eyes moved quickly, taking inventory of what was missing. "You redecorated," he said. "I reorganized," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." He nodded, swallowing. We sat across from each other, the coffee table between us like a negotiated border. I waited. Silence, I'd learned, had weight. If you let it hang long enough, people filled it with truth. "I didn't know," he said finally, "about how it would feel. The wedding." I studied him carefully. His face still carried traces of the child I raised. But there was also something new, defensiveness layered beneath confusion. "You didn't ask," I said. He flinched. "Claire had ideas. About aesthetics. About—" "I know," I interrupted. Not sharply. Calmly. "She wanted a picture-perfect day. I didn't fit the frame." "That's not what she meant," he said quickly. Too quickly. I reached for the folder on the side table, the red one. I placed it between us without opening it. "This isn't about one day," I said. "It's about years." His eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. "What's that?" "Truth," I replied. I opened it slowly. Not for drama. For clarity. Receipts. Spreadsheets. Printed confirmations. I laid them out one by one. The wedding expenses. The unauthorized charges. The messages he'd never seen, or pretended not to. "This," I said, tapping the papers, "is what invisibility looks like in numbers." He leaned forward, brows furrowing. "I didn't know she used your card. You didn't stop it either." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "And this," I continued, pulling out the letters, "is what the rest of my life looked like." I handed him Jonathan's letter. He read silently, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. Then the second letter. His hands began to tremble. "Dad knew," he whispered. "Yes. And you?" "I chose," I said firmly. "Every day." He looked up, eyes glassy. "So, you're not really—" I held up a hand. "Don't finish that sentence." The room felt tight, compressed by decades of assumptions. "I'm not angry because of biology," I said. "I'm angry because of erasure. Because you let me become background noise in your life. Because you learned how to accept everything from me and offer nothing back." He stared at the floor. I thought that was just how things were," he admitted. "That's the problem," I said quietly. Minutes passed. He finally looked up. "What do you want from me now?" The question was honest. It was also revealing. "I want boundaries," I said. "I want acknowledgement. I want to exist in your life as a person, not a resource." He nodded slowly. "And if Claire—" "This isn't about Claire anymore," I said. "This is about you." That landed. He stood after a while, folding the letters carefully and placing them back in the folder. "I need time," he said. "So do I replied. At the door he hesitated again. "I'm sorry," he said. This time it sounded different. Not performative. Not defensive. Just small. I know, I said. After he left, the house didn't feel hollow. It felt settled. Like furniture finally placed where it belonged. That evening I cooked again, not because I needed to but because I wanted to. I ate by candlelight listening to music I chose. Later I wrote another sentence in my notebook. I am allowed to change. Because chapter 5 wasn't about resolution. It was about redefining the rules. And the story, my story, was only just beginning. The invitation list surprised me. Not because it was long, it wasn't, but because every name on it felt deliberate. Chosen. There was Diane, of course. A former colleague named Ruth who had once defended me in a meeting when no one else had. My neighbor Paul, who had quietly shoveled my driveway every winter without ever being asked. 2 women from my book club I'd stopped attending years ago because life had grown too crowded with obligations that weren't mine. This wasn't family by blood. It was family by recognition. I spent the morning preparing my home, but not the way I used to. No frantic cleaning fueled by anxiety. No invisible checklist of expectations. I moved slowly, intentionally. I opened the windows, let fresh air roll through rooms that had once held their breath. I set the table in the dining room for the first time in years, using the good plates I'd been saving for an occasion that never came. I realized then how often women postpone joy. Waiting for a holiday. Waiting for approval. Waiting for someone else to say, now you deserve it. I placed flowers in the center of the table, simple, bright, and stepped back. The room looked warm. Honest. Lived in. When the guests arrived that evening, the house filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time, ease. Laughter that didn't tiptoe. Conversations that didn't revolve around someone else's needs. No one asked where Ethan was. No one asked why I'd canceled anything. They asked how I was. And I told the truth. I'm learning, I said. Still. We ate. We drank wine. Ruth told a story so ridiculous we laughed until our stomachs hurt. Diane squeezed my hand under the table once, quietly, the way people do when they want to say I see you without turning it into a performance. At some point Paul raised his glass. To Margaret, he said. For reminding us that it's never too late to claim your seat. There was no speech prepared. No applause planned. Just 6 people nodding in agreement. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. Later, after everyone had gone, I stood alone in the dining room looking at the empty chairs. For the first time, emptiness didn't feel like loss. It felt like possibility. That night I slept deeply again. In the days that followed, my routine began to change in ways that felt subtle but seismic. I joined a morning yoga class. I started walking in the park without headphones, letting my thoughts arrive and leave without judgment. I wore clothes that felt like me, not like a role I was performing. Ethan texted once. I'm thinking about what you said. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing him, but because I wasn't ready to give him back the version of me that replied immediately, reflexively, always available. Instead, I wrote another list in my notebook. Not of plans. Of principles. I will not pay to be excluded. I will not stay silent to keep peace. I will not confuse endurance with love. One afternoon, while reorganizing a closet, I found an old photo album. Ethan at 5. Ethan at 10. Jonathan standing behind us, his hand on my shoulder. I sat on the floor and flipped through the pages slowly. There was love there. Real love. Chosen love. And that mattered. But it didn't obligate me to disappear now. I closed the album and placed it back on the shelf. Not hidden, not displayed. Exactly where it belonged. That evening, as the sun dipped low, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Claire. Margaret, I think we need to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I set the phone down. Because chapter 6 wasn't about responding anymore. It was about deciding who deserved access. And I finally understood this. You don't rebuild your life with noise. You rebuild it with intention. I didn't respond to Claire's message that night. Not because I was afraid of what she might say, but because I wanted to be very clear about what I would say. Silence, when chosen, has a way of rearranging power. By morning I had decided. If this conversation was going to happen, it would be on my terms. I texted back one sentence. You can come by tomorrow at 4. No pleasantries. No apology. No explanation. At exactly 4 o'clock her car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as she stepped out, polished, composed, dressed like someone accustomed to being admired. She paused before knocking, smoothing her hair, adjusting her posture. Preparing. I opened the door before she could knock. "Margaret," she said, offering a tight smile. "Thank you for seeing me." "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. She walked into the living room and stopped short. Her eyes flicked to the bare walls, the absence of photos, the rearranged furniture. This wasn't the house she remembered, the one frozen in service to Ethan's life. "You changed things," she said. "Yes," I answered. "I did." We sat across from each other, the same distance Ethan and I had occupied days earlier. I noticed how Claire crossed her legs carefully, how she folded her hands in her lap like someone prepared to negotiate. "I want to clear the air," she began. "There were misunderstandings around the wedding." "Were there?" I asked calmly. She hesitated. "I never meant to hurt you." "I believe you," I said. And I did. But intent doesn't erase impact. Her lips pressed together. "I was under a lot of pressure. My parents' expectations. The image. The image mattered more than people," I said. She inhaled sharply. "That's not fair." "No," I replied gently. "What wasn't fair was seating me behind a door. What wasn't fair was spending my money without permission. What wasn't fair was pretending I didn't exist unless I was paying." The color drained from her face. "I didn't think you'd mind," she said quietly. "And there was." "That sentence," I said, leaning forward slightly, "is exactly why we're having this conversation." She looked at me confused. "You didn't think I'd mind," I repeated. "Because you saw me as someone who absorbs discomfort. Someone who keeps things smooth. Someone who sacrifices quietly." Her eyes dropped. "I won't be that person anymore." He swallowed. "Ethan loves you." "I know," I said. "But love without respect becomes entitlement." The room fell silent. Not tense, clarifying. "I'm not asking for apologies," I continued. "I'm setting expectations. If you want a relationship with me, it will be based on honesty, boundaries, and mutual respect. I won't fund lives I'm excluded from. I won't be managed for appearances. And I won't be erased." Claire nodded slowly. "I understand." I believed her. But understanding wasn't the same as access. When she stood to leave, she paused at the door. "I really didn't see it before," she said. "But I do now." I met her gaze. "Good. Because I see myself now too." After she left, I didn't feel victorious. I felt settled. As if something that had been misaligned for years had finally clicked into place. That evening Ethan called. "I talked to Claire," he said. "So did I." He exhaled. "I didn't realize how much I let you disappear." "I know," I said. "I want to do better," he added. "But I don't know how yet." "That's okay," I replied. "Learning takes time. Just don't expect me to carry you through it." He was quiet for a moment. "Will you come to dinner sometime? Just us?" "Maybe," I said. And I meant it, not as punishment but as truth. After the call, I walked outside as dusk settled over the neighborhood. The air was cool. The street quiet. I felt present in my body in a way I hadn't for years. Because Chapter 7 wasn't about confrontation. It was about clarity. And clarity, I had learned, is what remains when fear leaves the room. Peace didn't arrive like a celebration. There was no dramatic music, no sudden burst of joy, no grand declaration that everything was finally right. Peace came quietly, like realizing one morning that your shoulders no longer hurt from carrying a weight you'd forgotten was there. The days after my conversation with Claire passed gently. Ethan didn't call every day, and strangely that felt respectful. When he did reach out, his voice sounded different, less certain, more present. I filled my mornings with intention. I woke earlier than I used to, not because anyone needed me but because I wanted the stillness. I made coffee slowly, savoring the steam curling upward, the warmth in my hands. I began taking walks through parts of the neighborhood I'd ignored for years. Streets without memories attached to them. One afternoon I met Diane for lunch. She studied me across the table, her brow furrowed. "You're different," she said finally. "I feel different. Lighter." "Yes," I smiled. "But also stronger." She nodded as if that explained everything. That evening I opened the wooden crate labeled memories, not obligations. I didn't put the photos back on the walls. Instead, I arranged a few of them in an album. Ethan as a child, Jonathan laughing mid-sentence, a version of myself I almost didn't recognize. I honored them without letting them rule me. A week later, Ethan came for dinner. Not a grand meal. Just soup, fresh bread, and a table set simply. When he arrived, he hesitated at the doorway as if unsure of his role in this house now. "You look good, Mom," he said. "So do you." We talked, not about the wedding, not about money, not about Claire. We talked about his work, about a book he was reading, about nothing important at all. And yet, everything felt important. Before he left, he said, "I'm glad you're living for yourself." So am I. After the door closed, I sat alone listening to the quiet. It didn't feel empty. It felt spacious. That night, I wrote in a notebook for the first time in years. I am not defined by what I gave up. I am defined by what I chose. And I choose myself. Because this story, this long, complicated, painful story, was never about being abandoned. It was about being invisible. And learning, finally, how to be seen by others, yes, but first and foremost by myself. Chapter 8 wasn't an ending. It was a foundation. The knock came on a quiet afternoon. Not loud. Not urgent. Just 3 soft taps, hesitant, almost polite. I knew who it was before I reached the door. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes searching my face the way children do when they're unsure whether they're allowed to step inside. "Hi, Mom." "Hi." I stepped aside and he entered, not like he owned the place, not like a guest either. Somewhere in between. A position we were both still learning. He noticed the changes immediately. The rearranged furniture. The absence of old photographs on the walls. The calm. "You've changed things." "I have." He nodded slowly. "It feels good in here." We sat in the living room, sunlight stretching across the floor between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And I didn't rush to fill the silence. Finally, he said, "I didn't understand how much you gave up." I waited. I thought love meant you'd always be there. No matter what. "It does," I said gently. "But love doesn't mean disappearing." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't rehearsed. And that's why they mattered. "I don't need you to fix the past," I said. "I need you to respect the present." He nodded again, eyes wet now. "I can do that." When he left, the house returned to stillness, but not the heavy kind. This stillness felt earned. That evening, I took out my notebook and wrote. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing not to bleed anymore. Days passed. Then weeks. Life settled into a rhythm that felt like mine. Mornings of quiet. Afternoons of movement. Evenings of reflection. I stopped explaining myself to people who question my boundaries. I stopped apologizing for choosing differently. One morning, I received an email from a local community center. An invitation to host a small discussion group about life transitions. My first instinct was to say no. My second was curiosity. The night of the event, I stood in front of a circle of strangers. Women and men, all carrying stories they hadn't yet named. I didn't prepare a speech. I simply told the truth. "I spent years believing my worth was measured by how much I sacrificed," I said. "But I learned that love doesn't require erasure." When I finished, no one clapped. They leaned in. Afterward, a woman approached me, her voice trembling. I thought I was selfish for wanting more. "You're not," I said. "You're human." I walked home under a darkening sky, feeling something settle firmly inside me. Not anger. Not regret. Certainty. This wasn't a second chance at life. It was the first honest one. The morning was quiet, the way mornings should be when life is being rebuilt, one deliberate breath at a time. Margaret moved through the house with the certainty she had earned over the past months. The walls, once heavy with expectation and silence, now hummed softly under the light of her presence. She had stopped being the shadow who served without question. She was no longer the invisible mother, the unpaid accountant of other people's lives, or the silent caretaker of her own eroding joy. She had become someone who could stand in her own power, and the feeling was exhilarating, terrifying, and perfectly balanced all at once. Ethan's message from the night before still lingered in her mind. "I'm thinking about what you said." She hadn't replied yet. Not because she didn't want to, but because she had learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. It is a border that must be respected before conversation can even begin. She knew that when she finally opened this door, it had to be on her terms. By mid-morning, the house had settled into the rhythm of calm activity. She brewed coffee slowly, inhaling the rich aroma, allowing each sip to ground her in the moment. This was no longer the caffeine-driven, efficiency-obsessed ritual of survival. It was a ceremony of choice. She sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the red folder once more. Letters, receipts, and photographs, tokens of a life that had been lived in service to others, lay neatly arranged. And for the first time she didn't feel burdened by them. She felt liberated. She could carry them with grace without letting them weigh down the present. Her phone buzzed gently, the display lighting up with an incoming call. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. It was Ethan. She took a slow, deliberate breath before picking up. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice soft, uncertain, not the usual hurried tone of someone demanding attention. "Can I come by?" "I'll be here," she replied. And she didn't add anything else. The pause that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of acknowledgement, recognition, and the possibility of change. When he arrived, he was tentative. The way he stood in the doorway, hands awkwardly in his pockets, shoulders tight with unspoken anxiety, reminded her of the boy she had raised, now fully grown but still learning how to step into his own personhood. She watched as he took in the changes around him. The absence of old photographs. The rearranged furniture. The quiet calm that now defined the space. "It feels different," he said finally. "Yes," she said gently, "it is different. It belongs to me now, not to the expectations of others." They sat together, the coffee table acting as a neutral ground. No one spoke for a long time. And then, quietly, Ethan asked the question that had been hovering in the air for months. "What do you want from me?" Margaret didn't hesitate. "Boundaries. Recognition. Respect. I want to exist in your life as a person, not a resource." His eyes filled with a new understanding, a dawning clarity. "I want to do better," he admitted. "I don't know how yet, but I want to try." "That's enough for now," she said. "The rest is time." As he left, Margaret felt the stillness of the house differently than before. It was no longer the absence of activity. It was the presence of something intentional. She poured herself another cup of coffee and wrote in her notebook, "I am allowed to change." This chapter of her life wasn't about resolution. It was about defining the terms, reclaiming her space, and understanding that love did not require erasure. The evening light was soft, spilling through the windows like a quiet benediction. Margaret stood in the living room, looking at the space she had claimed, the home she had reclaimed, and the life she was slowly, deliberately building. Everything around her, each object, each memory, each quiet corner, bore witness to her choices, her boundaries, her presence. But she knew something even more important. This story was never hers alone. It had existed because someone had been willing to listen. Someone had followed her through the quiet heartbreaks, the letters, the erased milestones, and the long nights of reflection. To you, reading these words, Margaret felt a deep gratitude. Thank you for staying here, for walking through this story, for witnessing the small, radical transformations of a life choosing itself over expectation. She picked up her notebook and wrote a simple prompt at the top of the page. "What do I choose now?" And then she paused, considering the reader. The person who had journeyed this far alongside her. There is power in reflection. There is freedom in intention. So she invited you quietly to participate in your own way. Write a sentence, any sentence, in the comments, in your journal, or whispered aloud to yourself. Something that marks this moment for you. A word. A thought. A feeling. A recognition. It doesn't need to be public. It just needs to exist, because acknowledgement is the first step toward change. Margaret smiled softly, realizing that life's most profound lessons often arrive in quiet ways. Love doesn't demand erasure. Presence doesn't require sacrifice. Strength isn't always loud. And sometimes the bravest act is simply being fully, unapologetically yourself. She thought of Ethan and Claire, of Diane and Ruth, of Paul and the strangers she had met at the community center. All of them reflected the same lesson in different ways. Boundaries are not barriers, they are doors. Recognition is not conditional, it is a choice. Life is not to be survived, it is to be authored moment by moment. Margaret walked to the window, the night sky stretching above her, dark yet expansive, a mirror to the vastness she had begun to inhabit within herself. She allowed herself to feel the entirety of the journey, the grief, the anger, the patience, the release, and then she let it settle. There was no rush, no urgent resolution. Just the steady heartbeat of a woman who knew her worth, who had reclaimed her narrative, and who was ready to live it fully. If you've been here with her until now, take this moment. Reflect on what Margaret's story has shown you about yourself. Take the courage you've witnessed, the gentle power of saying enough, and bring it into your own life. And then if you feel moved, leave a comment. A single sentence, a word, a thought, so that this journey, these lessons continue beyond the page. Your reflection matters. Your voice matters. You matter. She closed the notebook and placed it on the table, alongside the letters, the memories, and the reminders of what she had chosen. For the first time in decades, the future felt not like a burden but like a landscape waiting to be explored. And in that exploration, Margaret understood the ultimate truth she had been reaching toward all along. Life, at its richest and most profound, is the one you author yourself. So she smiled, deeply and without reservation. And she whispered, not to anyone but to herself, to the story, to the quiet universe around her. I am seen. I am enough. I am here. And I am free. Thank you for staying with Margaret until the end. Carry the lessons forward. Write your word, your sentence, your intention. Let it be the doorway to your own emergence. The following weeks were a study in deliberate life. Margaret filled her days with intention. She joined a small yoga class at a local studio, walking to and from it without headphones, letting the sound of the city, the wind through the trees, and her own heartbeat be enough. She cooked meals that nourished her body and soul, savoring each bite without guilt or distraction. Each morning she awoke before anyone else, not to serve, not to fulfill obligations, but to honor the quiet space she had carved out for herself. Ethan called intermittently. Sometimes he asked advice about work, sometimes about life. And each time Margaret responded only when she wanted to, not immediately, not automatically, not out of duty. She was learning that the rhythm of relationships is not a currency to be spent but a connection to be cultivated. She watched him begin to step into responsibility, not just toward her but toward his own choices. There was no apology rehearsed, no guilt-tripping conversation, just honesty. And that honesty, she realized, was far more radical than any dramatic confrontation. Her connections with others deepened as well. Diane and Ruth became regular companions, voices of recognition and support. Paul, the quiet neighbor, continued his small acts of care, and Margaret accepted them without feeling indebted. Each person in her circle was there because they valued her presence, not because she had always said yes. She discovered a profound joy in this mutual acknowledgement, a contrast to the silent servitude she had once accepted as normal. One evening, while flipping through the old photo album, she realized that love had been present all along, real, chosen love, not dictated by expectation. Jonathan's letters, Ethan's growth, her own sacrifices, they were all meaningful. But meaning didn't obligate her to disappear into someone else's narrative. She could honor the past without letting it dictate the present. She placed the album back carefully on the shelf, neither hidden nor displayed, exactly where it belonged. Claire's eventual message came. Margaret, I think we need to talk. Margaret paused, then replied with intention. You can come by tomorrow at 4. No apology. No preamble. Just the clarity of terms. When Claire arrived, she noted the changed environment, the absence of the old frames and the shift in energy. The conversation was honest and grounded, focusing on acknowledgement, boundaries, and mutual respect rather than blame. Margaret didn't seek victory. She sought presence. By the end of the week, Ethan joined her for a simple dinner. Not about the wedding, not about obligations, not about Claire. Just conversation, connection, and the acknowledgement that living for oneself was now a shared understanding. Margaret realized that clarity, not confrontation, had rebuilt her family's foundation.